Italian food is my great passion. The more I cook, the more I study, the more I research, the more I discover about Italian regional cuisine. And sometimes I think that I'm going to run out of time and never really discover everything that there is to say about this subject. In this collection of recipes, I have pulled together all my old favourites, the sort of dishes that I continue to cook at home for my family and friends. One of the foundations of good Italian food is the basic tomato sauce. And here's how to make it. What you need are what I call the supporting columns of Italian cuisine: celery, carrot, and onion in equal proportions, chopped together with just a little bit of parsley or whatever other herb you want. I'm using a little mezzaluna. This is a crescent moon chopper, which is a traditional Italian implement, but of course you can use a knife if you find that easier, although this is really rather fun. So now that's all chopped nice and neat and small, and so we'll put it in here into some hot olive oil. I've got about 2 tablespoonfuls of hot oil in there. Just stir that around. Keep the heat quite low because you don't want it to scorch, but you do want them, all these vegetables, to fry down so that they're nice and soft. So the vegetables are now nice and soft. So in goes all the passata. These are tomatoes which have been pureed. They're lovely and thick and wonderfully sweet. Now a little bit of sea salt and some pepper. So one last stir, and then we cover it with the lid for 30 minutes to simmer. Well, of course, one of the best ways to enjoy lovely sweet tomato sauce is just simply to tip it over freshly boiled pasta, mix the whole thing up, add a little sprinkling of fresh Parmesan cheese, and you've got a wonderful dish. You can use dried Durham wheat pasta like spaghetti, or of course, you can either buy or make your own fresh pasta, which has the advantage of taking a lot less time to cook. Now, if you're going to make fresh pasta at home, what you need is 1 egg and 100 grams of flour per person. You knead all those up together and you end up with a dough like this. This is quite a soft dough, so to toughen it up, what you do is you roll it out several times until you've got quite a thick sheet like this. And then you can start using a little hand-turned pasta machine. And here what you've got is 2 rollers that roll towards each other and press the pasta between them. And then you come down a slot to a narrower groove and just bring it through the tagliatelle cutter. There you have it. And now these just need to be laid out to dry with a little sprinkling of flour. Now when it comes to cooking them, what you need is a big pot of water that is really boiling. I'm talking about a proper rolling boil. It has to have salt in it, and the proportion that is recommended is 7 grams of salt to a litre of water, so sort of a small handful really is the way. And that'll bring the boil up even faster. And then you just drop the pasta into the water, like so. Give it a good stir. Return the lid on the pot to bring it back up to a really fast boil, but then be sure to take the lid off because of course otherwise the water might boil over and put your gas ring out, which is very dangerous. I know that a lot of people think that they need to add olive oil or some kind of oil to the water to prevent the pasta sticking. Actually, if you've got a really big pot and if the water is boiling really at a wonderful sort of jacuzzi pace, you won't need to add oil in at all. And I personally think that it's a terrible waste of olive oil. Well, let's see if it's come back. It looks like it's come back to another. Oh, yes. Wonderful. Big, rolling, foaming boil. Just give it another stir. Now remember that fresh pasta takes much less time to cook than the dried variety, so it is very important that moment you keep an eye on it, and the only way to tell if it's cooked or not is to just fish a bit out and taste it. That's perfect. Right, so now we must drain it immediately, because as long as the pasta is hot, it is continuing to cook. So we'll go over here, drain it into a colander, now a lot of people forget that there's a lot of water that can get caught up in the strands of the pasta, so it's very important to shake out all that extra water. Any water left in the pasta is simply going to dilute your wonderful sauce, where all the time and effort has gone in. Now it's time to add in our lovely sauce. I've returned the pasta into the hot pot where it came from, so as to keep everything really piping hot for as long as possible. So there you have it, tagliatelle al pomodoro, or fettuccine al pomodoro perhaps. And all this now needs is just a little sprinkling of Parmesan cheese to finish it off. Well, what could be more authentic than a real pizza? Italian food is all divided up into the different regions of the country, so pizza is something that comes straight to you from the south of Italy, in Naples to be exact. Well, here I have some pizza dough, which now needs knocking back. It's been rising until it's doubled in volume, and all I'm going to do is just knock out the extra air so as to shrink it down. There you are. You see, it's getting smaller by the moment. And now I'm going to put it into an oiled baking tin. Now you can start to stretch it a little bit to make sure it's going to fit, but you mustn't use a rolling pin, because that'll just press all the air out of it and you won't have that lovely light base. When you've got it to about this point, you can start to press it into position. Now the pizza will spring back a little bit, but you've just got to be firm and make sure you get it even all the way around. There. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to just give it a little coating of some lovely extra virgin olive oil. Now, the pizza I'm going to start off making is called a Pizzaquatro stagioni, which means a 4-season pizza, and here are the toppings which I'm going to use. Now, quattro stagioni actually means that you divide the pizza up roughly into quarters, and then you put a different kind of topping on each of the 4 quarters. And I'll begin with some mushrooms. So the tomato goes on first. These are just sieved canned tomatoes, and you really don't want very much on there, just enough to roughly cover that quarter. And I've got some sliced mushrooms here, which I'm just going to put on top like so. And here I have some real buffalo mozzarella. This is the best mozzarella you can buy, and as you can see, it's floating still in its way. And I'm just going to slice off. Oh, isn't that beautiful? It's so soft and crumbly. It's going to melt beautifully on the top. So I'm just going to put a little bit there. And now I'm going to add another little drizzle of olive oil, a little bit of pepper, a little salt, and finally a little sprig of basil or 2, like that. So that's the mushroom section. And now over here I'm going to start putting on the fishy part. So once again, a little bit of tomato on the bottom. You'll notice that I'm not going all the way to the edge, and that's because you must always have what is called the frame, la cornice, which allows people a clean edge with no topping on it to hold their pizza while they eat it, because you must, of course, never ever eat your pizza with a knife and fork. And now, this next section is going to be the prosciutto. Now, prosciutto crudo comes from the Langhirano Valley, which lies just outside Parma. So it's often called Parma ham, but actually the real name for it is prosciutto crudo. It's a cured ham, which has been cured with just a little bit of salt for about 14 months. And again, some more of this wonderful mozzarella. You can buy mozzarella that is not made with buffalo milk. It's slightly cheaper, and it's usually called fior di latte. It will have fior di latte somewhere on the packet. And now we come to the final quarter, and this is the most traditional and the oldest topping you can have on a pizza. It's called pizza marinara, and it's the original version. No mozzarella, and in fact, in the very early days, it was made using crumbled bay leaves as well. But these days, it's just a nice lot of tomato, lots of chopped garlic, a real lot of chopped garlic. Pizza marinara, nothing to do with sailors, nothing to do with seafood, but just a delicious combination of oregano and garlic and tomato, and again some olive oil and salt and pepper. And that now completes our Pizzaquatro stagioni, which is now going to go into the oven. What you do need to do is to get your oven really very, very hot indeed, and then it should bake in just about 10 minutes. But of course, whatever you put on top of your pizza, what really matters is the dough underneath, and getting that right just simply couldn't be easier. Tip a mountain of 400 grams plain white flour onto your work surface. Then make a hole in the centre with your fist. Mix together 40 millilitres of warm water with 1.5 teaspoonfuls of sugar and 40 millilitres of milk. Crumble in a lump of fresh yeast about the size of a cherry. Once the yeast has completely dissolved, add a further 100 millilitres of warm water and pour it onto the flour. Now add 2 tablespoonfuls of olive oil. Add a little salt, about half a teaspoon, and then mix everything together. Now get kneading. You might have to add a little flour if the dough seems too sticky or tacky. And you must knead energetically. This is where you can work out all of your aggression. It's a really good idea if you can possibly push away from yourself with the heel of your hand and turn the dough a half turn so as to incorporate as much air as possible in between each push. After about 15 minutes, the dough will be smooth and elastic and no longer sticky. Put the dough in a bowl, cover it and leave it somewhere warm and draft-free for an hour to double in size as the yeast works its magic. And after knocking back, the dough is ready to use. Another one of the great Italian dishes is risotto. Now, it used to be really difficult to get hold of the right kind of rice, but nowadays supermarkets and delis sell all different kinds of varieties. Bialone nano, the little tiny one, almost looks like pudding rice, carnaroli with its big fat grains, and the more usual variety, which is called arborio. So, in this pan over here, I have got some peas, courgettes, celery, carrot, onion, as usual, some shredded lettuce and some tomato. And I've just sweated all those down together so that they're nice and soft. And now I'm ready to tip in all my rice in one go. Now I need to keep the heat quite hot, quite high for this. In goes all the rice. And now what needs to happen is that the rice grains need to become coated with the butter and with the flavour of the vegetables. And what you'll hear is that the rice will start to complain about this. It'll start to sort of shriek and squeak in the pan as it dries out. What it wants you to do is to add in some liquid. But but you have to hang on and just keep stirring until everything is really evenly distributed, so that then when you do add in your liquid, it becomes absorbed really quickly. That's very important. So this combination of vegetables and rice becomes a springtime risotto, risotto primavera. It's a lovely fresh tasting dish which is ideal for vegetarians, and if you are making it for vegetarians, of course, you need to be sure to use vegetable stock and not chicken stock. Risotto comes from the north, and therefore you almost always use butter, which is the preferred cooking fat of northern Italy, as opposed to olive oil. Now, I think I've made my rice squeak enough. Next to it here, I've got a pan of just below the boil vegetable stock, and now I'm going to just start to gradually add it in to the rice. That first sound that you hear is called il sospiro, the sigh, and it's as if the rice grains were sighing with relief, because at last you've given in and you've started to add the fluid that they need to cook. Now, the cooking process here is not one of evaporating the liquid, but of getting the rice grains to actually absorb the flavour of the stock and cook in amongst the vegetables. So you really do need to be very careful not to add in too much stock at a time. And this will take, from this point on, about 15 minutes. Well, the risotto's cooked now, which means that the rice has gone wonderfully creamy and that all the vegetables are really tender. So it's just resting for a moment, waiting for the finishing touch, which is just a little dusting of some fresh Parmesan cheese. Now, there are two kinds of Parmesan, or these kinds of grating cheeses, available in Italy. One of them is called Grana Padano, but the much better variety is called Parmigiano Reggiano, and you can tell which one it is because they'll have their names there on the rind. And I have some freshly grated just here. Now, if you can, it's always much better to buy a block. You don't have to have a block as big as this, of course, but it's much better to buy a block and then cut a piece off and grate it as you need it. It'll keep for really a very, very long time, and it will taste so much better than the stuff you get in those little tubs. So I'm now going to tip the Parmesan here into the rice, into the risotto, and just give it one stir, and that really is now a dish fit for a king. A very important Italian sauce that must not be forgotten is called pesto. Pesto is basically a raw sauce that uses lots of ingredients that are just put into a pestle and mortar and pounded down to a smooth paste. The word pesto comes from the verb pestare, which means to pound or grind. So you can make a pesto using all sorts of different ingredients, but the traditional version, which comes from the region of Liguria in central Italy, is made using pine kernels, garlic, lots and lots of basil, extra virgin olive oil, Parmesan cheese, and a little salt and pepper. So we'll begin with some garlic, and I'm just going to peel a clove of garlic, show you just how quickly it can be done. And I'm going to put 4 cloves of garlic into the pestle and mortar and add a little bit of salt to that to help me grind them down. The salt adds the friction that I need to get it into a paste. Now, the next ingredient going to go in is a handful of pine kernels. These come from the umbrella palm and are found inside pine cones. And they too will release their juice and their oil to make the sauce nice and smooth. And next, once I've got these fairly well broken up, I'm going to add in a large handful of basil. And it's really beginning to smell like a Ligurian summer's day. Absolutely wonderful. Now, this is where it starts to get to be a little bit hard, because things are beginning to glue together. So I need to start adding a little bit of olive oil. olive trees that produce olive oil grow all over Italy. And in Liguria, which is very rocky, the olive trees produce some very, very tiny, dark brown olives that make a specific kind of oil that gives the pesto its particular flavour. Now, Parmesan. And the finished texture should really be very, very smooth. If you don't want to go to all this trouble, of course, you can use a food processor, but it won't be nearly as much fun, and it won't taste nearly as good. A bit more oil, and we're almost there. Now this sauce is used usually over pasta, and traditionally in Liguria they use some very fine ribbons of pasta called tagliarini, or else they spoon it over great big potato gnocchi called trofie. There we are. Final bit of seasoning. Just a little bit of pepper. And I can't tell you how delicious it smells. All those wonderful fresh aromas. So it takes 2 or 3 minutes of good energetic pounding to get it to the right texture. And when you've finished, it really ought to look something like this. And I'm going to use my pesto on some salmon. So first of all, we mix up the pesto thoroughly with some dry white wine, and then pour it over the salmon steaks or the tail fillets in a shallow bowl. A nice bit of seasoning, and then you can leave it to marinate in a cool place, but not the fridge, for about 5 hours, turning the fish occasionally so that it will absorb all the flavours. Now in a lightly oiled non-stick pan, the fish will only take about 4 minutes on either side to cook. But you'll need to keep turning the fillets over, and while the fish is cooking, spoon the pesto marinade over it so that by the time the fish is cooked, all the sauce will be in the pan. As an alternative, you could wrap the fish in foil parcels and put them under the grill or in a hot oven for about 5 to 6 minutes. You can then serve them at the table as parcels and let your guests unwrap them themselves. Salmon with pesto, salmone al pesto. It's just one way of cooking with pesto. Some people don't mind the skin on cooked peppers, but if you prefer the skins off and you've wondered how to do it, let me show you a really quick way. Turn the pepper round and round in a gas flame until it's blackened and blistered all over. The skin will then rub off easily after 10 minutes in a sealed plastic bag once the pepper has become cold. When they're skinned, here are 2 ideas for typical antipasti or starters. The first is peperoni arrosto, when you grill peppers flavoured with garlic and parsley for about 5 minutes until they are slightly blackened. Garnish with anchovy strips and serve hot or cold with lots of crusty bread. And I've used them here served on toasted garlic bread as bruschetta. In Italy, tiramisu is eaten very much as a cure-all. Mamas make it for their ailing boys, so each time you eat it, it's likely to be slightly different from the one you ate before. Anyway, this is my recipe. It's the dish I make for my boys when they're not feeling too good. You begin with 4 egg yolks, 4 raw egg yolks. Into the raw eggs, we put 4 tablespoonfuls of sugar. In goes all the caster sugar. And now I'm going to whisk that together. Until it's well blended. And it's much quicker to do this using an electric whisk. When they change colour, as they're doing now, I'm going to add in 2 teaspoons of very strong espresso coffee. Now this egg and coffee and sugar mixture is ready to be blended into the mascarpone. It's a really, really very, very rich cheese indeed, and it is used a great deal in both savoury and sweet recipes. So now I'm going to pour the egg yolk, sugar and coffee into there. This is a good tip. If the mascarpone feels a little bit too hard and isn't whipping up as well as you'd like it to, you could always stir in just a little bit of milk to loosen it a bit. Perhaps if it's been in the fridge too long, it might just go a little bit hard. I like to add in some coarsely grated, good quality chocolate at this point, and sometimes just after Christmas, if there's some nougat left over, I shatter it with a hammer and stir that in here too. So now I'm going to fold in my beaten egg whites. Not everybody uses the egg whites. I like it with egg whites because I think it's much lighter in texture. It's far less cloying. A little quantity of the egg white, using light strokes. And when I've got it to this sort of texture, I can start the folding technique, which is of course always a sort of rough figure of 8. And obviously the usual Ministry of Agriculture safety rules apply. In other words, it's not a good idea for people who are very young, very old or unwell to eat raw eggs. And very, very lightly, so as not to push the air out, fold in the egg whites, which must have been beaten until they're really, really stiff. As soon as you've got everything blended together and there are no obvious large lumps of egg whites, stop stirring. That way you'll keep it good and light. Now, all that remains to be done now is to put the whole thing together. Here I've got some weak coffee into which I'm going to dunk my biscuits, and here I have some brandy. I'm going to just add some of that into the coffee. Now, just dip the biscuits and really get them saturated. These are Italian boudoir biscuits, but you could use normal ladies' fingers if you have those. And now I'm just going to arrange some of the biscuits soaked around the edges of my dish. And when you've got them settled in the bottom, you can put in your first layer of the mascarpone cream, another layer of biscuits, another layer of the tiramisu cream. The finishing touch is a little bit of cocoa powder and some coffee powder mixed together. Now it's best to leave this overnight in the fridge if you can resist it, because everything will really soak together really well then, but certainly it needs to go into the fridge for at least a couple of hours before you can enjoy it. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed these recipes, and I hope also that you'll come back to them again and again, and maybe sometimes add something of your own to them if you feel the urge. I wish you buon appetito with all my heart, and remember, cooking must above all be great fun.